Welcome back, 90 minutes before the hour, 7 o'clock, and it's back to school next week after the July-August vacation. And many children are starting new schools while others are transitioning from one standard or form to the next. Joining me on set to discuss how we can prepare our charges, our children, mentally for the new school term, as well as some guidelines for parents and children, we have Ms. Kelly McFarland. She's a psychologist, and she is the PRO for the T&T Association of Psychologists. Welcome to Morning Edition. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Pleased to be here.
Okay, step one.
Yes.
Traffic and the trauma of traffic.
Trauma of traffic.
How do you, look, during the July-August vacation, the children go to bed later,
Yes.
they wake up later,
Yes.
and now they must transition after 2 months
Absolutely.
of glorious enjoyment.
Yes.
How do we, as parents, get them to transition now back to the old routine?
Right. So what we want to do is start at least a week before.
A week before?
Yes.
So we should have started, what,
Should've
Monday?
started already, yes.
Yeah, all right.
But it's never too late. Start still. So what you want to do, start getting them into their school routine. So
Right.
start getting up at a certain time, going to bed at a certain time, having a breakfast at a certain time.
Right.
So that coupled with your normal relaxation of the vacation would help you transition now into when school reopens.
Right.
And you have to do all of that, plus go to school.
Right.
You would have already been kind of back into the gear of getting up on time.
I hear
and all
you.
of
I
that.
hear you. Now, also, let's talk about for the children who are transitioning from one standard to the next or one form to the next. I mean, this is not really relevant in that particular instance, but for the
Yeah.
children entering school for the first time, for the children entering a new school, what are some of the tips for parents to ease that transition as well?
Good. So open up the conversation. Ask the child how they feel about going to school, first of all. We're not imposing any particular ideas or are you nervous? We're not trying to get them anxious. But do ask them how they feel. See what their attitude towards school is. Kids should be excited about school. School is supposed to be a happy place, right? If they're not...
But you read the local newspapers, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, so if they're not, we want to have a conversation with them about why they're not. Is it a social issue? Are you afraid of your ability to perform? Are you afraid of the teachers? Are you afraid of adults? Do you think people wouldn't like you? You know, so open it up and see what their issues are. Empathize with them. Let them know, listen, I understand at this age and at this stage, it might be really tough. That sounds like it could be really scary, as opposed to, well, you have to go anyway. We don't want to do that to the kids, right? Show them that you empathize and that they can come to mommy and daddy when they have these issues. And just, ask them, what do you want? What do you think would make it better, would make it easier? What do you want mommy to do for you to help you to make this easier? And then, of course, you can also offer some things that would help them feel a little better.
Like what?
So it depends on what their issue is, right?
Yeah.
So if they're afraid of the teacher, get into why they're afraid of the teacher. Maybe sometimes kids misunderstand the teachers.
Okay.
We
All
know
right.
that, right?
All right. Fine.
And if the teacher is an issue in terms of the child is afraid of the teacher's particular style of communication with them, parents should get involved and go to school, talk to the teacher. Of course, we're not talking about in a hostile manner or negative confrontation, but you want to do the most that you can to make school a comfortable place for your child, because a child under stress is not going to learn well.
Yeah, I totally appreciate that.
Right.
So parents, the bottom line is that parents ought to be a lot more involved in what's happening
Absolutely.
in the school.
Absolutely.
So your involvement as far as it does not end when you drop the child off.
Nope.
Your involvement in that school really should also
Throughout
entail
the term.
attending meetings and requesting a meeting with maybe the
Absolutely.
form teacher or a
Yes.
particular subject teacher, depending on whether they're in secondary or primary, that kind of thing.
Precisely.
So parents themselves need to be managing their time
Yes.
to allow them space
Yes.
to get involved.
And mirroring calmness. So if there is an issue at the school or with the child, you don't try not to get more worked up or more anxious than the child, because children mirror our behaviors. They learn how to manage stressful situations and uncomfortable situations from us. So if you're anxious and you're mommy or daddy, then what's going to happen to me, because you're the one who's supposed to help solve this, right? As I said, solve. We don't really want to solve kids' problems, but we want to help them navigate problems. But either way, the point is, try know that they're mirroring your behaviors.
Why you raise a very important point, I mean, in passing, but really and truly, I think it's an important point for parents to appreciate. Why do you think it's a bad idea for parents to always seek to solve
Because
their children's problems, as opposed to giving them the tools to confront these problems and resolve these problems in their own way?
Because we all have to learn how to solve problems. We all have to learn how to survive in this world. And we have the capacity, different levels of capacity, and it has to be developed. So if we go kind of really scientific or biological, the prefrontal cortex, which is where in our brain houses all of our executive functions, it literally develops from our interactions with our environment and the things that we learn. So our ability to rationalize, solve problems, it all happens from learning. So there's a school of thought in psychology called conscious discipline. And what that promotes is that when we allow children to try to solve their problems, it sticks better than when we just tell them to do things. So they develop enough independence to really navigate throughout the world successfully.
Yes.
It builds cognitive skills.
But I mean, when you look at what's happening across the social landscape and how parenting has evolved over the decades, you find that parents are now very into micromanaging the life of the child, particularly the younger child. And of course, by the time they're teenagers, they rebel against all of this micromanaging, and they adopt some radical approach to how they should live their lives and so on. And then you have the issue of parents who are extremely busy securing the bank account, and they're not spending that quality time having that discussion, opening the discussions, all of these different things, in the child's own time, not when you have scheduled it as a parent, say, okay, today I'm going to discuss this matter, tomorrow I'm going to discuss this matter, but just letting the conversation naturally flow to these things. This is the reality of the life of the parent in the 21st century. How do you advise parents to really make that space? A lot of our employment practices are not family friendly. How do you get parents to really take on the discipline, making the space to interact properly with these children?
You use the right term, making the space. We have to make time. As a parent, you have that duty. You have to make time to sit with your children and know what's going on in their lives. We can't have it one extreme to the other. Either we're kind of absent, because I mean, either we're absent or we're overly involved, right? Children need space to develop, to grow, to become individuals. They need to feel like individuals to an extent. That's how the development process goes. They have to develop their personality. They have to try out different things. But at the same time, what you need to act as a parent is a guide, right, to help them sort of navigate through it, through the heartaches and the triumphs, be there and kind of just, teach them along the way ways to cope with failures and triumphs.
Yeah, but so often parents have a tendency to adopt certain paranoias about things like crime and bullying in school and the online issues and so on. How do you calm parents down and help them to take a very rational approach to these matters and not be overly concerned about the day-to-day interactions your child may be having when you're not around?
So it's tough to tell a parent to be less concerned because you just are. It's your child and you're reading the news, you ask me if I read the paper, right? But what you have to do is manage your anxiety.
Right.
Don't project it. Don't let your child necessarily know that you're so afraid. You do what you need to do in the background to protect your child. And while talking to your child, but display calmness and all the skills that you want them to learn when they grow up and they have to face difficult conversations and difficult situations.
Yeah.
Show them those behaviors. And then when you go off and you talk to your husband or your wife or your brother or your sister, you could have all the anxiety you want,
Right,
you know?
right.
And of course, I mean, obviously you're talking to a psychologist. So if you're so anxious that you can't function, then you need to, figure out if this is normal anxiety that you're having as a concerned parent, or if you yourself really experiencing an emotional sort of disturbance. And you go talk to a psychologist, get some help.
You see, I'm glad you're talking about, people seeking counseling as a normal part of their
Absolutely,
routine.
yeah.
But that's not our experience in Trinidad and Tobago.
Unfortunately.
That we really, it's not a normal thing for somebody to say, you know what, in the same way you say, listen, I need to visit the GP.
Yes.
Or I have a dental appointment.
Uh-huh.
You don't hear people say, well, you know what, I have a counseling session,
Yeah.
this weekend.
Unfortunately.
Yeah, but how do we change that mindset that, if you're going to counseling,
Yeah.
it means something must have gone horribly wrong in your life, and therefore you are in need of some major intervention to solve your issues?
Well, it starts with understanding mental health as being on a continuum that we all move up and down every day, right? It could be because of death, it could be because of a falling out with a coworker, a boss, or it could be because of a mental illness that you have, but we all move up and down the continuum, and sometimes things become a little too heavy to bear. So people go to counseling, yes, or to a therapist, yes, when they have a mental illness, but people also go when they have different problems in living and they need to just get some guidance or some help sort of figuring things out about themselves and why they behave in the ways that they behave. What also impacts that is stigma. So the language that we use from childhood, very, very nonchalantly, very easily. Oh, you're mad? You're crazy? You need to get some help.
Or I have my papers.
Oh boy. Oh boy.
I have my papers.
Yes.
So don't mess with me.
It gives the wrong impression, or it gives a one-dimensional impression of what mental health is all about, or mental illness is all about.
Yes. And it's important that, as the PRO of your Association of Psychologists, it's great to have these conversations to normalize the fact that you can seek counseling from a professional. Sometimes you can seek counseling from other third parties, and it's always good to use a third party as opposed to a related party.
Yes.
Because sometimes people have their own biases about
That's
you
correct.
and your situation, and therefore they try to
Absolutely.
impose their opinion on how you should approach the matter and so on. Isn't that something that people should avoid?
Well, yeah.
Don't go seeking counseling from your neighbor, or don't go seeking counseling from some long-time friend. You really should be talking to a third party.
Well, it depends on what level of counseling you need. If you just need to vent, you could vent, you could vent to anybody that you trust.
Go on Facebook and vent.
No, that's putting your business out for everybody to travel all over the place.
In case you haven't noticed, that's exactly what people do.
Yeah, but that's not the best thing to do for the rest of your reputation.
Yeah.
But then what other people what you said was right in terms of people's biases. That's important, and also people's emotions, because when you talk to family members and their emotions get involved,
Right.
the advice or the guidance could be skewed in
Yes.
whatever direction the emotions skewed in, or sometimes they say the wrong things that throw you off even more because
Right.
they are also emotional.
Yes.
You know.
Nowadays I recognize that, I don't know if it's just the millennials, that generation, or the post-millennials, but nowadays everybody is into this issue of, triggers, and there are certain triggers that, so people give these trigger warnings that what I'm about to say to you may trigger you. So what is that something now that we should take cognizance of, that we're careful that how we have conversations with people, especially difficult conversations?
Well, yes. So you touched on two things. You touched on triggers. And now you're saying that should we be careful that we don't trigger other people?
Yeah.
Yes and no. It depends. Because sometimes trigger is a funny word. So a trigger is something in psychology, in therapy, that we do encourage people to be aware of. But then when you're talking about confrontation, we use the word trigger so loosely. So it depends on if you're using it in sort of in a clinical term, or if you're using it just loosely as, okay, what I'm going to say is going to upset you.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And that's not necessarily a specific trigger. It's just when you confront people, they don't always like it.
Right.
But it's necessary sometimes.
Yes.
And coming from the right person with the right attitude and the right way in the right time,
yes,
it's fine. But it has to happen. We can't go about life with people just never telling us, okay, you made me feel this particular way when you did this.
Right.
And we just get away with everything.
Yes.
It's normal. That's how relationships grow. You have to confront people about things.
Yeah. Just to wrap things up,
Sure.
and it was great having you here, but if we were to look at how we move forward, right? If we were to move forward with a more enlightened view of mental health.
Yes.
Mental health, not from the perspective of, well, you are schizophrenic and therefore you are in need of hospitalization and
Right.
medication and so on.
Yes.
I'm talking about, as you described it, we move up and down the continuum.
Yes.
And mental health is something that we should take on board as a serious aspect of our overall health.
Of course.
How do you help people recognize the importance of mental health? I see everybody talking about, I need to take a mental health day and so on.
Yeah.
How do you help people to incorporate mental health as part of their daily routine?
Self-care strategies. Okay. First, education. So we have to let people know how your mental health can be affected. So just how we have physical injuries that could fester and get worse if we don't take care of it, we have several psychological injuries like rejection, feeling guilty, right, failure. These things, you go to work, you get rejected, you fail at something, it bothers you for the rest of the day, it affects you psychologically and emotionally. We need to be aware of these things, aware of our triggers, and then learn how to cope with them. Right? So it's about helping people understand the importance of that, the impact of that, and learning how to take care of yourself.
Self-awareness is so important.
So important.
All right, we're going to go to the 7 o'clock news,
Right.
but we're going to come back. I want to talk about self-medication
Sure.
and some of the dangers that people may actually expose themselves to when they think that they know better than the psychologist and the medical doctor and so on. Okay?
Yes, sure.
All right, folks, we're going to run to the 7 o'clock news, and when we return, we'll be talking a lot more about mental health issues and, of course, the whole issue of parents and children and back to school. We'll be right back after this. Good morning. Welcome back, folks. It's 4.5 minutes past 7 o'clock, and we're talking with Ms. Kelly McFarland, psychologist and PRO for the TNT Association of Psychologists. And it's a focus on family, and of course, we are looking at back-to-school issues and everything else, and da-da-da. There is a danger out there with regard to people recognizing the need for assistance regarding their mental health and engaging in self-medication. The whole opioid crisis across the United States. Johnson & Johnson, they settled out of court paying some $500 million to the state of Oklahoma because they were accused of the proliferation of these opioids and doctors prescribing this as a drop of a hat kind of thing. What are the dangers that we face in Trinidad and Tobago with regard to the issue of self-medication regarding mental health issues?
Number one, you create a new mental health issue.
Right.
So you have an issue. You feel depressed, you feel anxious, extremely stressed.
Right.
You start drinking.
Right.
Eventually, you're going to need an extra drink to get the same effect.
So you're digging a hole to fill a hole.
You're digging a bigger hole to fill a hole, right?
Right.
And so now what you're left with is financial problems, probably. If you develop an addiction, that's another mental health issue. Interpersonal problems because you get addicted to something, and then it might lead to other substances or might not, but it creates a new problem. It's maladaptive coping.
Yeah.
Also, when you self-medicate, you're just covering the surface of whatever you're dealing with.
Right.
Why not get deeper and get rid of it? Okay, so you could have a tumor and you're getting headaches from the tumor. You could take Panadol, then you might graduate to morphine at some point. But if you remove the tumor, perhaps you will stop having headaches, right?
Yeah, but you might be afraid to remove the tumor depending on where it is.
A lot of times we're afraid to to remove the tumor. We're afraid of that surgery. And even though we're talking metaphorically,
Yeah.
therapy could be like that as well. People are afraid to go deep.
Yeah.
But it's for a moment to have a much healthier and happier life. And not just for you, but for the people that you impact.
How do people recognize when they're slipping into this trap that, look, I am not in the best frame of mind, a drink will help me, a pull will help me. How do people recognize when they're slipping into that and pull themselves away from the precipice?
People recognize how we pull ourselves away is to come out of denial. That's number one.
Yeah.
Number two, what kind of creates that cycle of denial and fear for getting help is stigma. All of us have to be so careful how we talk to people who we think are well. 1 in 4 people experience a mental health problem in any given year. That's a large amount.
Hold on, you're talking about in Trinidad and Tobago?
In Trinidad and Tobago. It's a global statistic, but also in Trinidad and Tobago. That's
So
what the World Health Organization...
You're saying 25% of our population with certainty will experience a mental health issue.
Could be depression, anxiety, burnout, right? And of course, when we experience it, of course, other people are affected because now I have coworkers, or I might have kids, or I might have parents, or I might have siblings or friends who now experience me in that particular frame of mind.
Yeah.
So there's nobody that can say, hey, I've never felt, overwhelmed or extremely stressed or known anybody who has. So when I look at you or I look at somebody else and I talk to them and I use certain terms, what if you were going through something and now you're afraid to talk to me or anybody else because of the kind of things that I see regarding any type of inability to cope or any sort of mental health stressor?
Right.
And when we do that, and it just goes on and on, that's what helps to perpetuate this issue of people not ever getting help. It starts with all of us, well and unwell.
Now, we also are confronted, while we're struggling to achieve a certain level of self-awareness, and while we recognize that there are these readily available substances that we can access in order to self-medicate and so on. What are some of the issues? We have been talking about the decriminalization of marijuana, and we've been concerned too about these over-the-counter drugs that are readily available from our pharmacies. What kind of discussion should we be having with regard to a policy framework to protect people from themselves regarding this whole issue of self-medication? Because there's a lot that teenagers can access over the counter in a pharmacy. Readily available substances that you can purchase from a grocery. Teenagers can be involved in sniffing glue for that matter. The point is, what kind of policy framework should we have as a nation, recognizing all of these issues, in order to protect people from themselves?
Well, I think the OPM and UNICEF are doing a whole sort of package of educational educational material for parents and children to understand some of the struggles that children experience and the ways that they may deal with it. I think we need a lot of that, public service announcements to help children cope with stress? Because everything you're alluding to, everything, when we talk about self-management, we talk about trying to escape anxiety. We talk about
Right.
trying to escape this some sort of emotional, psychological discomfort, not knowing a better way out of that sort of feeling. So it, sort of helping people learn how to recognize signs in your kids or in yourself, and how certain choices or popular choices can lead to bigger problems. And social media is a good avenue, especially when you start talking about teenagers. It's a good place. You have all these Facebook, Instagram have these ads. If you're talking policy, or you're talking from a government's perspective, we
Yeah.
can start from the ministries and so on, using that platform, using those ads, and getting information out to children, to teenagers. In terms of, we probably can't have laws against things like glue and these are the things that kids will find, but we do have to, as parents and as responsible adults, be aware of these trends.
Yes.
And do what you can to protect your kids, talk to them. We have to be much more open and much more communicative with children. We
Yes.
have to realize that children aren't just, do as I say, and we do have to have a relationship, a good relationship with them. We really have to know, because they have minds of their own.
We have to talk to them like people.
Precisely. Precisely.
We have to talk to them
Yeah.
like people. But I just want to, just a little segue to the issue with employers and their employees. In the same way parents need to monitor, look, observe their children's behavior and look for any signs of a change in behavior, change in routine and so on.
Yeah.
What kind of, I know some employers do have the employee assistance programs and so on, but what can employers do to provide some additional support to their employees, particularly in this kind of environment where, there's so many challenges in the economy and, layoffs are taking place in certain companies and that kind of thing. How can employers assist a little more?
Yes.
Because the first thing that an employer is it cost.
Yeah.
But what are some of the things that maybe an employer can do to assist, people with their mental health
Yeah.
fluctuations?
Right. So they have the EAP. You could have talks with your staff that,
Like workshops?
workshops,
Yeah.
yes, where people
Okay.
come in and talk about mental health in the workplace, and kind of lecture to them about how to take care of their own mental health. Employers should always watch their culture, the culture of the organization, because that impacts
Yeah.
how people cope within the organization. Are we fostering sort of a helpful environment? Sort of, we have away days, we have light times, we can kind of communicate with each other well. What are the leaders like? What are the supervisors like? Are they supportive of the staff? Can staff go talk to them when they're under stress? One of the major theories about I'll talk about two actually, about stress in the workplace is work-life imbalance, right? So I know some companies even force people to go off on vacation, the ones who just want to,
You
to
have
work
to
a
go.
lot.
Yeah, it's
Yes,
mandatory.
right? But are your employees having a good work-life balance? And then the other one is control, support, and demand. So you have heavy demands with no control and limited support. Those are the things that create a lot of stress for an employee.
So say it again, control, support, and heavy demands.
Yes, control, support, demand. So no control or limited control, heavy demands, and limited support.
Yes.
Overwhelmed.
Yes.
And sometimes people operate under these conditions for a long period of time, they know they're unhappy, but not realizing the real stressful toll it's taking on them.
Yes.
And when you lose your talent and people you start seeing presenteeism and absenteeism because they're always sick
Yes.
or they just can't cope, then that affects the bottom line, and what's the point?
Yes. I was looking at a CNN presentation. I think it was Dr. Sanjay Gupta. He was talking about stress being a leading cause of death amongst people between 30 and 55. So we're talking about people who are not retirees or any such thing, but stress being such a critical aspect of your work-life situation that people, of course, they engage in self-medication, there's suicide, and all that goes on. And of course, it's now becoming one of the leading causes of death in the United States, which is quite a horrendous scenario.
But stress is a gateway to a lot of other illnesses.
Yeah. Yes.
Cardiovascular disease, anxiety, depression.
I mean, we call it lifestyle diseases and so on, but in many cases, the bottom line cause, the root cause is stress.
Yes.
And as you said, how people are coping, with this lifestyle that we live, the work-life issue, the home issue, the community issues, the crime issue, everything compiles and it becomes a stressful situation. But final word to you in terms of going forward, what are some of the things that you would advise people regarding managing their stress, managing their relationships in a rapidly evolving environment? What would you tell people in terms of this self-awareness and self-management, how to put that as part of your daily routine?
Okay. Know your triggers. We use that word.
Know your triggers.
Know your triggers. But also foster very healthy relationships, even if it's one relationship or two relationships. People that you can sort of go to, talk to. So when you're really emotional, that person might might be in a position to kind of give you some better advice or support. So foster healthy relationships, know your triggers, take care of yourself, put yourself first sometimes, do things that you love, do things to relax. Don't just focus so much on making $1 that you kind of just lose yourself and your time to enjoy yourself, you know. Go out and do things, spend time with people, go to the spa, get a massage, take time, watch some TV, read a book, whatever you like to do. Take at least a day for yourself.
And whatever you can afford to do.
The beach, listen, we live in the Caribbean, the beach free, Take a drive, go to the beach, spend a day in the beach when everybody else is at work, or, there are little things that you can do, whatever you like to do. Just make sure and take care of yourself.
Yeah, just take a day, a mental health day.
Take a mental health day. That should really be a thing in Trinidad. I know it's a thing in England, I think, but it should be a thing in Trinidad.
Mental health day.
You need a mental health day sometimes.
Yeah, maybe we could put it into the legislation too, that people are entitled not just to paternity leave, but mental health leave.
Yes.
Right? And make it part of your overall compensation package.
There are something called therapeutic lifestyle changes, such as exercise, getting enough sleep, and having a good nutritious diet.
Good nutritious diet.
Good nutritious diet, balanced diet. Those things have such an impact. If you're rushing around every day, you eat a doubles this morning, and then you start to feel sluggish. You might start to have problems with your body.
Right.
You have to really take time to make ourselves feel good.
Yes.
Take care of yourself. And then of course with exercise, you have the neurochemicals, the feel good chemicals happening, and you feel like you're doing something good for yourself.
But the balanced diet is something we need to pay attention to carefully. Thank you so much for being here, Ms. Kellyanne McFarland. Very good pointers for people to really latch on to and make a difference heading into 2020, that these are things that we need to focus a lot more on, because I have a sneaky suspicion that we're going to be living increasingly stressful lives going forward. But that's part of the terrain where we need to manage. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Great to have you here. Ms. Kelly McFarland. She is the psychologist and PRO for the Association of Psychologists in TNT. Well, folks, we have a lot more to talk about. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
When